Okay, so now that we have the basic widgets package loaded, there's actually more features that are available, which we're going to cover as we proceed through this exercise of deploying a bunch of widgets, getting them laid out correctly, and then getting their values promoted to the top level. The top level is this OM component. So you'll see there's a knobs page here right now. So this is the beginning sort of first folder, which shouldn't actually be there. We'll make that on our own when we're ready. So we're going to add custom parameters to this OM, and we're going to have one value for every knob, slider, and button in this user interface. Why would we do that? What's the point? So let's just imagine for a second that we're obviously going to want to use these knobs to control something. So let's just use it to control a color. And we'll just create a null here and call this out. So it's a really, really simple network, right? What if I wanted to connect this knob to this parameter here, this red parameter here? So what I would have to do is if I wasn't using binding or custom promoted parameters, I would control right click on the knob and go into the parameters or load parameters. I'd go to the values page and I would copy the value parameter and I could paste it here, for example, paste reference. And now they're connected. So if I close the parameters and I come back to this in a week, how clunky is this path here? So what if I change the name of the layout that it's in? Then I'm gonna I might break my expression. Imagine having a huge system with all of these expressions deployed all over the place. Things are going to get very, very messy. And as well, this parameter is now tied to this knob, which is way down here. It's inside layout, it's inside knobs, it's way down here. So it's extremely bad. This will become a very difficult to manage system over the long run. And this is why we created this notion of pushing your widget values up to the top level. And so that's what binding is. So let's just do a simple bind to get started here, and then we'll get into the better workflows as we go. So if I right click on OM and go parameters, or sorry, customize component, I can add a knobs page. So let's just say I wanted to promote the knob parameter. The manual process for this is I can create a knobs page, and you'll see if I'm looking at the parameters themselves, which are here, when I create the knobs page, it's going to add a page here. So see, it just added the knobs page here. So now I can add a knob1 parameter. So I want it to be a float parameter, and click add. And so now I've got this parameter located here, and I want to tie it to this knob. Okay, so that's what binding is. So if I control right click on the knob parameters, I want to bind to the value parameter. So I would copy knob1 parameter, and I would paste it onto the value1 parameter here, and go paste bind. And now I've got this nice clean expression, parent.control. Control is our OM controller component, and then we're binding to the parameter called knob1. Okay, so that's the manual process. However, if you follow some rules, which I'm going to go over now, we can simplify the process. This quicker methodology only works if you have the basic widget mothership package loaded. Okay, and so let's get rid of this bind and do this again. So I'm going to get rid of knob1, and let's go inside of our UI and take a look at knobs. So what we really want to do is create 12 knobs, because that's what we need for the OM controller. We need this section here to be full of 12 knobs. And so I'm going to show you a quick trick to make 12 knobs, and then we're going to really quickly bind them to the top level or promote them to our OM controller. So I'm going to go into knobs, and I'm going to create a replicator. And a replicator component will quickly duplicate a component for you, and it makes things easy to manage. So if we go into the replicator method, and instead of replicating by table, which means a dat of rows with different, holding different information regarding each replicated component, we just do a very simple new method, which is by number. And I type, well, we want 12 replicants, so I'll type 12 here. The master operator is knob1, and you'll see right away it created 12 guys, or actually 13. But if we call this knob, it will actually get 12. So because this is the prefix, you'll see right now it's by default creating item 1, item 2, item 3. So if we use the operator prefix knob, then we'll get a nice clean set of 12 knobs. So just in those few simple steps. As well, I recommend using the grid, instead of grid layout, use vertical. And now we've got a nice, clean, easy to read set of widgets. And the reason why they lay out in this grid-like layout, and this is a new feature since when we were shooting the videos in April, the last part 5, etc. of the series, you'll see there's a left to right, the layout is left to right, but I have max per line set to 4. So every time it hits 4, it's going to wrap and start a new row. And so that's really easy. That's a really nice, clean way to set a grid. Before we had to have separate layout containers, which was really clunky. And so now this is actually, things are getting quite a lot cleaner, workflow-wise. You'll see if I set max per line to 0, they're just going to stack horizontally. And that's because we're aligning left to right. So remember, this is the knobs container that these guys are inside. So if we set this to 4, then it's nicely gridded. Okay, so we've created 12 widgets really, really easily. That's great. But now I want to promote them to our parameter box. So this is the ohm top level parameters. That's ohm here. And sorry, there's lots to fit on this screen. And then this is the component editor. So if I added a parameter here, it's going to get added here. But if we have the basics, if we have the basic widget package loaded, then I can just select all of these knobs, and I can drag and drop them onto parameter. Because now one thing that I've done, I've premeditated that what I want I named the node to be the name of the parameter. And that makes sense because essentially when you're binding a widget to the top level parameters, you want the name to match. I mean, that's probably the easiest way to know what's going on and to understand which. This is something I've sort of discovered over experimenting with the workflow a little bit. However, you'll also see that the name of the value, this is called the value name, I've put an expression me.name. And so this is what is used to create the bound parameter. So just to be clear, I'm going to change this to be, I'm going to change this value here for now, just really, really quickly. I'm going to call it, other, sorry, I call it whatever, sure, whatever is fine. So this is, the name of this value is whatever. If I go to the output of this widget, you'll see that it's called, the name that comes out, the value that comes out of this is called whatever. So you can see that's why we have this widget value name parameter. So I can change the name to whatever, and you'll see it changes, okay? So if I drag this widget component onto the parameters, it's going to use that name. So see, it's called change. So it matches. So it's not the parameter name, or it's not the widget name that will map back to this parameter. It's the value name of the widget value. So let's delete this bind. And when I delete the bind, you'll see it says unbind references to delete deleted parameters. It's going to delete this bound parameter here. So So if I say yes, you'll see it's going to clear this expression. And now it's cleared. So imagine doing that en masse. It's going to be pretty straightforward to clear a whole set of bound widgets. And actually, it should delete the expression, but that's a bug. Okay, so let's do this en masse then. So let's start from the top. All of these guys have the expression me.name. So knob1's value name is knob1. Knob2's value name is knob2. Quite nice and simple. So we might even make this the default. Leave feedback if you like. So we've got 12 knobs, and all I need to do to promote them to the top level and bind and then create binds for all values is simply drag and drop these guys onto the parameter page, the parameter lister, and then they will all be bound. So knob1, so you'll see it created knob1 here. It's bound to this guy via this expression, and when I move this, I move it there, and vice versa. If I move it here, and that's the whole idea behind binding. You can go to the interactive window and move the knob. You can go to the value and move the knob, and you can actually go to the top level parameter, and you'll see it as well. It's nice and clean. The knob parameter, the promoted knob parameter, is the same name as the widget that it's attached to, and the value name for the widget that it's attached to is the same as well. So if I put a null down here and I look at the value coming out, you'll see it's knob1. So it's all nice and clean. Knob1, knob1, knob1. Okay, so that's the suggested new workflow. So far, so good. Obviously, we have limited experience as all this stuff is pretty new. So let's just go through that process again, and we'll start populating this as quickly as possible. So we need 4 sliders. I'm going to go into the sliders component. We've got slider, this should be called slider 1. And you'll see it as well has the name is bound to me.name. As well, you might also take notice that error is coming from this straggling expression. The label is me.name as well. So everything's nice and clean. So if I go here and I type sliders, create a new folder, parameter folder for sliders, which we'll now see here. You'll see I just created a sliders page. And now if let's just do our replication. So put down a replicator. And go to the by number. And how many do we need? We need 4 here. So I'm going to call master operator slider 1. And I'm going to do the operator prefix slider. And we want how many replicants? We want 4. And now we've got 4 sliders here. And we want this to be stacking vertically. And that's it. Okay, so now we can grab these widgets and drag them onto our component editor. And we've got bound parameters with, and the other way of saying that is we've got widgets with promoted parameters. That's what we want. That's the goal. Okay, so let's move on to the toggle. Do it again. We want a replicator. You'll see, as a side note, I added a little bit of shading and rounded edges to the buttons. That's just done with. You can take a look and see how this is set up. But I'm just putting these background images onto the toggle button background off and on top here. Okay, so let's replicate this. Replicator. And by number, this is going to be a toggle. And we need 4. Number of replicants, 4. Now we got 4 guys. We want to stack them vertically. And then they're easy to grab and Oh, and by the way, the order that it's going to put them in another reason why we stack vertically is the order that it's going to put them in the list is the order that they're stacked vertically in. So I can create a page called toggles. Sorry. Toggles, add page, and grab these guys. Okay, so that's all bound, and we can check our work here, toggle here, turning on and off this guy, and vice versa. Okay. All right, so this is the button array. So there's 64 buttons here. So this is the buttons component. We need a replicator. You'll see I called this B1, so we're going to go by number. B1's the master. The operator prefix is B. And how many do we need? We need 64. I might as well do vertical right away. Vertical. And number of replicants is 64. And you'll see in a second they all lay out here. Okay, so we're ready to bind these to the parent. So let's create a buttons page. And then zoom out, grab all the guys. And then make sure that they're the only widgets selected, and drag and drop them onto here. And you'll see in the buttons page we'll end up with 64 bound toggles. Takes a second, lots of work. And you'll see now button 1 here and button 1 here are now bound, and so on. Okay, so that's good. Let's keep going. We've got this sort of unusual set. Oh no, we've got the mixer to do. So let's create the mixer page. The mixer is here. That's this little guy here. This one's a little bit simpler. We don't need to do any replication, so I'll just go to the mixer, click add, and I can just drag and drop these guys. This should probably be capitalized cross, because it should be caps. Cross AB. You'll see this is actually called cross AB uppercase. We should be careful to make them all lowercase. So that's actually more correct. And yeah, so we just need to take these 3 guys and drag and drop. And you'll see that they come in the order that it's not alphabetical order or anything like that. It's the vertical order that they're going to be brought into the, and we've got our mixer panel now, A, B. And we should be working. Good. Moving along. We've got to do this upper array of switches. So let's create a switches page. So you'll see this is a nice workflow now because it's nice and clean and easy to understand what's going on. If I've got a component of stuff, maybe call it the name of that stuff. And then inside, we're going to create parameters and widgets that are tied together. So in this case, we just need another replicator. By number, vertical. This is a switch, and this is a prefix of switch. And how many do we need? 6. And we've got 6 guys there. And we need to promote to the switches page. So we go to switches, no parameters, drag and drop this. And we've got 6 switches, and they're all bound. Okay. Next is extra button. This is pretty straightforward. So, you know, actually, I don't want to have a page just for extra button. Obviously, that's kind of stupid. So we can call this page whatever we want. We can call this combo. This is called the combo panel, right? So I can just call this combo. Doesn't matter. You can rename your folders without any trouble. And then we can add just by dragging button X, I can drag it here, and we'll get the button X there. I can move this down if I want, and I can create a new section for it, right? So that's the section thing. It gives you a nice line here. And we can do the same thing for dials. So we need a replicator. And this is by number, and it replicating vertically. And we want the dial to be the master operator, and the prefix is dial. And we want 4 of those, I think. Yeah. And then grab the dials and drag them and drop them into here. And for some reason it's creating them up at the top. That's another bug that we'll fix. Move it down. Whoops. Drag this down here. And I'm going to put a section there. And that's good. Okay. So they're all bound. Okay. And then finally, we're down to the last 2 sets of sliders and toggles. So let's go to sliders. This is a slightly different case because this is slider 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're always starting at 0 or at 1, and slider 5 starts at 5, right? So that's easy to do with the replicator. So put down a replicator, go to by number, and we want the master operator to be slider 5, and we want the prefix to be slider, but we want the replicant suffix start, which was at 1 by default, to be 5. So set this to 5, and then replicate, we need 4, and you'll see it starts 5, 6, 7, 8, and we need this to be vertical. Okay, so what's the side effect of us coming up with a good naming convention is now I can go back to the sliders page, and because they're unique, there's no other sliders in this. You notice in the, I called these dials. You have to have some kind of strategy, right? So these could have been sliders 6 or 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever, right? But I called these dials, and I called these sliders because they look the same, so that was going to be nice and clean. Even though they're in a completely different section, I can go back to my sliders here. Because they're uniquely named, and all parameters on the same parameter box need to be uniquely named, therefore your widgets should be uniquely named, then we can drag and drop these guys onto here. And they should have been below. And great, that's nice and clean. And now we've got this set of widgets bound and this set of widgets bound. We can see that here. Sorry. Parameter box for that. Parameters, sliders, and bound. Okay, toggle's the last guy, and it's the same case. So we got starting with toggle 5, and replicator. We need this to be by number. We're going to stack vertically, and we're going to call this toggle 5 as the master operator. Its operator prefix is toggle. And the number of replicants we need. And by the way, a good hint for working with replicators is type the number of replicators in that you need at the end. And that way nothing weird will happen. So this is the toggles page. So we've got toggles here. And I'm going to go replicate. So we need 4 toggles total. They're replicated. Oh, but it's starting at 1, right? So I messed that up. All I need to do is change this to be 5, and it'll automatically fix our network. That's the power of the replicator. And then grab toggle 5 through 8, drag onto here. Unfortunately move, that's a bug, and you're good. Yeah, so now we've got, without too much effort, we have all of these parameters bound and correctly promoted to our top level. So we can safely close our component editor and we can start working on things.